Sir,
Yeah.
on the reviews from last semester, are those still like correlated with this, with these texts?
Are you talking about the study guide?
Well, from the YouTube videos, there's a review.
Oh, actually, they'll be up. I did not put last semester's YouTube video on your cover. If you know a friend or buddy who has.
It's on your YouTube channel.
Oh, it's all on YouTube still. That's right. My lectures for the last 2 years are still on YouTube. So they'll apply.
So those
They would take a lot of time to listen to them. A lot of you would be redundant, but they do apply. Yeah, I'm using essentially the same test I use, except I made a few modifications of the same test I used.
So the
last
review
semester.
class, we can just watch the whole review on one.
You can watch the review. Yeah, you can watch the review. There's a few of my YouTube videos that label review.
So we won't do reviews this way?
Huh?
We won't do reviews this
No,
way?
I've got stuff. Well, actually, yes and no. To some extent, I've been reviewing the first 3 classes, and this is my 4th class to review.
Okay, so we don't. Okay. So this is a review class.
No, this is just a regular lecture day, which I'm reviewing for the next test cycle of the first 3 classes.
Okay.
I don't mean to sound facetious, but I mean, I am reviewing.
No, everything's review.
Everything's review. The whole thing's a review. Preparing you for, I mean, hey, folks, I want to remind you, this stuff makes news from time to time. I mean, the Egyptian pyramids make news often, King Tut. The Chinese terracotta figures makes news, yes.
It was actually on CNN yesterday that somebody, I guess a couple years ago, 8 people have been charged with like negligence, like historical negligence in dealing with King Tut's like mask. Somebody broke it off and then just like publicly did that.
Whoa.
Yeah, and then somebody noticed.
I did not know that, no, but I'm not surprised. Again, these things do make news regularly. The Stonehenge has made news quite a bit in the last year. They found more stuff buried underground nearby.
We just glue
That's
the link
part
up
of
to that.
So it all right. Now that it's 4 o'clock, yeah, it's 4 o'clock, so I'll make a few explanations about the test. This is one time, hey, when I say no scantrons, that does not mean every test, folks. But for Wednesday's test, you do not need a scantron. For either the pass, there'll be a pass, there'll be a test. You don't need a scantron. You just put your answers on the sheet of paper that I hand out. Basically, the test is simply like this. You might see the word Persia, and you tell me, is Persia the name of a country, a person, a religion, or, just in a sentence or two. Now, the correct answer is Persia is an ancient name for a country that's today called Iran, but you can throw that in if you want to. But just 1 or 2 sentences that tell me that you know what Persia is. Now, if you say an Egyptian king, I have to count it wrong. Yes?
So most of the test is fill in the blank?
It's mostly fill in the blank, just like what you see here, and you fill in the blank. Now, that is good for most of you because in multiple choice tests you get tempted to go for a wrong answer. And the same thing with true false. But one of these I grade as leniently as I can, and generally there's no curve. Probably a third of you will make A's, another third of you will make B's if you study. I mean, I don't mean to make it sound easy. But the bad thing about a test like this is the ones who do poorly make down in the 20s and 30s. The ones who do poorly, in a multiple choice test, everybody stays within the raw score of 50 to 80. Well, I can give a 20-point curve, and everybody has a score of 70 to 100. That's multiple choice. But for this, there'll probably be no curve. And it's going to be really difficult for those of you who don't study, and pretty easy for those of you who do.
My U.S. history teacher, she gives all take-home tests.
Yeah, don't throw that up to me now.
I almost
Because,
wanted to
hey,
drop the class because
I don't know who it was, but I just had to talk to the teacher who holds the class for about 30 minutes and then leaves. Don't expect me to do that. And I had one say, I've had surgery, oh, but this teacher counts off for attendance. I got to tell you about attendance. I've been told I must take attendance, but I cannot count. I make it part of your grade. I've been told that, so I don't, but I do take it. I've been told that I should. I mean, hey, part-time instructors are easy to get rid of. No, I don't give take-home tests. I have my reasons.
yeah, even the final is taking.
Okay, don't put that, throw that up to me. I'm me. Hey, she's her. I mean, to each his own. right, now I want to make it clear about the test. So I made up 60 questions. You will get the 30 of them. The other class gets the other 30. I do not know which 30 you'll get. I don't want to know. So when I say this might be on the test, that means I put it on the test, but I don't know if you'll see it or not. Like the word Gilgamesh, yeah, it's on the test. Or whether you get it or the other class, again, I don't know. If you get it, hopefully you all know what to put down. If you don't, well, you put down what you do get. But the other class will take their test next Monday. They will meet on Monday, and they will not be answering the same questions that you are, and you will not be answering the questions that they are. I mean, all of you, I think, know the reason for this. So, you know, there'd be basically a format of, I put a word down and you find, oh yeah, something else about the test. About a third of the answers you'll find on the back page. I say a third because the other class will be looking at the same back page that you are. So some of the answers will apply to you and some will apply to them. So, so a bunch of what you see on the back page will not even be answers at all. But the back page will benefit some of you because if you just think, oh, I think I know this, well, look at the back page and see what's there. And it might help you in about a third of the cases. Yes?
You think a back page of the test?
There's two sides of the paper. There's a front of the test, some questions, some of them are on the back. The same test. The company, I'm talking this stuff. The school wants me to do that to save money. So don't do like I had. Don't just fill in the front page. Flip it over and fill in the back also. And at the bottom of the back, you'll find some answers. What you see here is my seating chart, which is something else. But yeah, so check the front and back sheet. For the pass, the same thing. Answer the question on the front and the back sheet. It consists of 2 pages, but they're front and back, all the same. Yes?
And the pass is not part of the grade.
Oh, yes, that's the law. The pass has to count 5% of the grade. So, yes, indeed. In my case, I count 11%.
Okay.
I'll show you the formula. I mean, the formula is on the syllabus. Yes?
What's the difference between the pass and the test?
Huh?
What's the difference between the pass?
Okay, the pass is a new regulation that was imposed on us in the fall of 2014 that we all must do 3 pass to supposedly teach basic skills. In history, one of the basic skills is know the difference between primary and secondary and know how to read a map. Basic skills. And it must be given 3 times, and the dates are defined by state law. And that's the pass. And again, folks, supposedly all your teachers are giving it. Now, you tell me, I know this teacher's not giving a pass, scratch. I've been told I have to.
And the material for the pass is on.
This time, yeah, this one time, the material for the pass is on iCollege.
It is
Study guide for the pass is on iCollege.
Okay, so the test, I'm sorry to ask you a question. The test, fill in the blank is going to be 75% of their test, and the rest is going to be short answer?
It's all the same. The short answer, fill in the blank. I mean, it's just simply put a word down and you define it.
Okay.
Put a word down and you define it. Now, there'll be a few questions there. Well, I ask a question, you give the answer the best way you can.
Okay.
Yeah, but I put something down, but don't put down that the Euphrates is the name of some king. I mean, you do that, I'll count off 3 points. I mean, yeah. I mean, but if you put down a river, I mean, I get the idea. But I'd rather you put down a river to the east of, no, it's a river on the west side of Seward. I mean,
Can we say
west
that
of
it's
the
one of the
Tigris.
2 rivers that go?
One of the 2 rivers, yeah, excellent answer. Anything that's within the ballpark, I'll bend over backwards to try to get out right what you put down. But basically, you're filling in the blanks, as opposed to multiple choice tests, which I have given in years past.
Okay, so it's not like a one-word fill in the blank.
No, it's not a one word.
Okay, okay.
Now, well, some of it might be. Some of the question can be answered in 1 word. All right, yes. If you want to put 1 word for some of it, yeah. Now, also, folk, I'll explain now, and I won't have to explain on Wednesday. When I get your test booklets and your pass, you'll have your name on the top. I'm going to fold the name down. The reason that had nothing to do with you, it has everything to do with me. That way, when I'm grading it, I won't see whose paper I'm grading. Once I put a grade on it, then I'll see whose it is and record the grade. But this way, I'll be grading your papers completely blind. I mean, I'll admit, I'm human too, and I caught myself. And when you're running a machine, I mean, Scantron's still a machine. I mean, the Scantron machine doesn't care whether you're white or black or Jewish or Christian or whatever. That Scantron doesn't know or care. But in my case, being human, I feel like I ought to really make sure that I am not looking at your name because obviously I find myself, catch myself doing things that I should not be doing. Anyway, all right. All right, anyway, so I won't be looking at your name while I'm grading your paper. All right, so if you see me, I've had students, when I made that speech, they'll fold it down for me, and that's fine. All right, yeah. Anyway, so I won't be, hi, anybody else? We gotta move on, anybody else? Okay, y'all know, hopefully now, lectures are on iCollege. The lecture for this morning's, well, this 1 o'clock class I teach, might benefit you a lot because I've only met with them 2 times. It's a hybrid course. And I went ahead and I skipped around a bit, but I covered a whole lot of ground that might happen to benefit you if you'll take the time to listen to it. So, anyway, there. Now, we left off last time with Israel. And again, I could easily spend the entire semester talking about Israel. I want to elaborate, though, on a certain story they told. When I was in high school, there was a man on the football team. He was one of the better players. But the subject came about Israel leaving Egypt and how that when Israel left Egypt, the Red Sea parted from one side to the other, and the Israelis marched across the Red Sea on dry land. Then when the Israelis got across, the Red Sea closed up and drowned Pharaoh's army. This one young man, he's a year older than I am. He spoke up and said, I don't believe that, I'm a preacher's kid. The time I'm talking about, this was in the 1960s when everything had a materialistic bent to it. And every story that had a supernatural, that's had some supernatural, had to have a natural explanation at the end. Harry Potter was not written in the 1960s, folks. But hardly, could hardly have been written in the 50s. Because they were so naturalistic. And I believe that people of this generation is not as naturalistic. But let me remind you of something. Every generation, every ancient person, let me start off. Every ancient nation starts its history with stories like the ones you read about in the Bible, stories that we today call fairy tales. No exceptions. Whether it be the Chinese, the Indians, the Indian Indians, the American Indians, the British, the British tale of King Arthur pulling a sword out of the stone, that has a ring of a fairy tale. Every ancient people believed in the supernatural, without question. So why should the Jews be any different? Now, as far as this, whether or not, the person chooses to believe, that's up to him. But this man said, I don't believe that, and I'm a preacher's kid. Well, all right, I'll tell you a little secret. I'm also a preacher's kid. Do I believe it? You might take it, venture a guess. Here's something to go about that story. The way that Hebrews kept their history, not the way other people. The Jews kept their history to where everybody knew it. In order for this story about the Red Sea folding over and Mount Hosea, in order for that story to be fake, 2.5 million people have had to get their heads together and say, let's all lie to the next generation and pass down. Here's the way the Jews pass the story down. They get together every year at Passover time, and they look around the room they're in and decide, now, who among us is the oldest? So they'll pick some old person who's older than everybody else, and they'll say, okay. Then they look around, who's the youngest person in the room? And it has to be someone who's old enough to talk. Someone who's too young to talk can't participate. But so it's usually some young preschool child. This preschool child is talking, you go up to this old person and ask them why we celebrate Passover, why is tonight different from other nights. And the old person will tell the story about how that they were freed from Egyptian bondage and how that Pharaoh's army got around and how the plagues were sent to the Egyptians. They have been doing this ceremony for 3,000 years now. And I've read books by even agnostic Jews, Immanuel Velikovsky by name, and Zachariah Sitchin, and these Jews cannot be called believers, but nevertheless they believe this story. And they seek natural explanations. Velikovsky believed that the planet Mars came near the Earth and created a very high tide that spread the sea apart, then the sea collapsed back. I find that a little bit fetched. But every Jew practically believes it. Even the ones who do not believe in God, the agnostics, the atheists among them, believe that story. Because they've been telling for 3,000 years. And again, if for that story be fake, 2.5 million people have to say, let's lie to the next generation and have them repeat the story You know, basically their history was everybody told everybody else. Yes? Okay. All right, if any of you have any comments, welcome. Some of you might know I'm about being Jewish. I'm married to a woman who's part Jewish herself, so and I know we realize we live in a Jewish community. I mean, this school is located in the middle of a Jewish community right here. I don't live in one, but this school is located in a Jewish community. Anyway, again, one reason that the story is believable is a group of riffraff, a bunch of shepherds came into Egypt at one point called the Hyksos, and they took over. How could this happen? Well, if Egypt had no army, well, a bunch of riffraff would come in. If Egypt, as long as Egypt had a trained army, they could have kept this riffraff at bay. And with a bunch of people called the Hyksos, I talked about them last time, came in. Anyway, going on with their political history, they went into Canaan and partially conquered it. They never quite conquered all of it. They eventually set up a kingdom. The kingdom, the strongest kings were David and Solomon. Then the kingdom split in two under Solomon's son. Again, so many times you have these kings could build up a big, vast empire, and his son could not keep it up. Well, the same thing happened to Solomon. Israel was one kingdom, Judah was another. The kingdom of Israel lasted about 300 years, and eventually they were carried captive to Assyria. And then Israel disappeared in Assyria, and we don't know where they are. Just the biblical account says he went to the river, went to a certain river, the river Gozan, I believe. We're trying to figure out what river is Gozan. There were several theories, but they disappeared from history. Judah, on the other hand, lasted 100 years longer. When the Assyrian army came to Judah, a plague hit the Assyrian army, and the king of Assyria had to go home. But 100 years later, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon captured Judah and carried his people captive. And Judah was to remain captive for approximately one generation, about 70 years. Then a ruler of Persia named Cyrus, known as Cyrus the Great, Cyrus, king of Persia, allowed everybody who had been displaced to return home. And Israel rebuilt its kingdom. They had to fight a war with their neighbors, long wars with their neighbors, which they eventually won. It's called the Maccabean Wars. They achieved political independence. Now, an interesting story. When Alexander the Great, all right, we're going to be talking about Alexander when we come to Greek history, but Alexander, on his way from Phoenicia, after he conquered Phoenicia, Alexander went through Judea, and he told the Jews to worship him, that he was God. The Jews refused. He said, well, you have to be conquered. But the Jews, rabbis, the leading rabbis came out, and they opened up the book of Daniel the prophet, and they said, this prophecy was made 300 years ago, and it says that you are going to conquer the Persian Empire. And they showed it chapter and verse. Alexander was so impressed, he exempted the Jews from having to worship him. And then Alexander then joined with the Jews, so made a peace treaty with them. Then Alexander went on to Egypt, and from there in Egypt, he left Egypt, and after conquering it, he went on to conquer the rest of the Persian Empire. Eventually, the Romans conquered Israel, and finally the Romans got so tired of dealing with Israel that they conquered Judah. The Romans got so tired of dealing with it, finally the Romans scattered them all over the place, and the Jews were to remain scattered all over the known world for 1900 years. In 1948, they came home again, and the rest belongs to another chapter in another history. All right, that's the political history. They've been conquered by several times by nations around them. By Assyria, by Babylon, released by Persia, conquered by Rome, and overrun by the Islamic armies. But they've come back. All right, their main contribution, though, to humanity is the religion. When they started out, they were like the only people in that part of the world who were monotheistic. believed in one God. They were very different from everybody else. In fact, they were called a peculiar people. They believed that their God was the only one that existed, that the others were fake, or the others did not really exist. They believed that their God knew everything that was going to happen or had happened, past, present, future. He could not be defeated, could not be confused. He had made the world, but he maintained a separate existence from the world. Therefore, the nature was not to be worshipped. He had made nature, but nature was not God. Therefore, the river was not God, the sun was not God, the moon was not God. He was everywhere. He did not have one location where he was. He was all over the place. Basically, he was a spirit. One of the things that was unique about him, though, is they required a standard of morality among the people that you don't find very often in the ancient world. Moses gave him the law. The law consisted of some 600 commandments. Most of them were do's. I mean, most of them were don'ts, but there were a few do's in there. 600 things. The heart of the law was the 10 Commandments. And again, which are court is forbidden to be displayed on public property, but that's another issue. Anyway, the law told people how to conduct themselves toward God and how to conduct themselves toward each other. Again, it was associated with morals, something you don't find very often in the ancient world. Now, we're about to talk about another group of people who did have morality associated with their religion. The Israelis were told they should not worship any other god except their own. And throughout their history, then, they've had a difficult time assimilating with other cultures. Again, because they were different. They were a strange people, peculiar people, different from other peoples, and they've had a difficult time joining with other people. But over a long period of time, all the world around them adopted their belief in monotheism, at least. Christianity and Islam are offshoots from original Judaism. And again, a lot of Islamic writings praise highly. A lot of Jewish prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah, and whether the Jewish prophets, Hosea, are all found in Islamic literature, all praised highly. Abraham praised highly in Jewish writings, I mean in Islamic writings, as well as Christian writings also. So Christianity incorporated a whole lot of Judaism, as did Islam. Again, this, folk, you can verify by looking up and doing your own research. All right. They had something else that was unique about them. Everybody had access to God, not just the priests. Now, this is an issue. You know, who has access to the gods? Most religions have had priestly mediators. Priest, the word priest means a mediator between God and the rest of us. The Jews had priests, but at the same time they said anybody who wants to pray directly to God can do so without going through a priest. And Islam has no priest, no priestly mediators. And then Christianity, some branches of Christianity do have priests and some do not. Again, depending on a person's personal religious beliefs. But the Jews had both. They had priests as well as the belief that you could go directly to God yourself. Again, Israel exists to this day and is a big part of the Middle East, and has probably the most powerful army in the Middle East and is the only democracy in the Middle East. And until recently, they were our closest ally in the Middle East. It's hard to tell now what their status is. They don't even know where they stand with the current government of the United States. All right, I'll move on. Assyria. I've already mentioned how that Assyria carried Israel captive to some place we don't know where today. The Assyrian Empire was destined to last 1,000 years, even though their period of dominance was only for a couple of generations. They actually had been very powerful way, way back yonder. Then they became just another one of the kingdoms. Then, late in Israel's history, they became very powerful again. Their territory was located in what is today northern Iraq. Now what this meant is that they were at a crossroads between the east and west and north and south. They had the barbaric peoples to the north to deal with, the Scythians, and then they had the Babylonians to the south to deal with, not to mention the Hittite kingdom to the west and the Persian kingdom to the east. They were invaded often. They knew the meaning of fear. So they became a very cruel people. Now, the Assyrians claimed to be descended from Ashur, who was the son of Shem, who was the son of Noah. Shem had 5 sons. One of them was Ashur. This makes the Assyrians a Semitic people. Your Semitic peoples, or most of the peoples in the Middle East. Now, your Iranians are not Semitic, but your Iraqis are, your Arabs are, the Jews are, and the Assyrians are. There have been times in history when a certain group of people have made an invention that's put them ahead of other people around them. In the case of the Assyrians, their invention was iron. Not that they invented iron, but they found that they could use iron better than anybody else. So they made their weapons out of iron, they made nails out of iron, they made tools out of iron. They used iron, and they gave them advantage over their neighbors. They also built chariots of iron. Before this, most of the peoples in the Near East had used brass or copper, and sometimes they mix brass and copper and make bronze. Brass, copper, and bronze are not strong metals when compared to iron. And any army facing an army of equal size, if one army is using iron weapons and the other one is using brass weapons, pick the winner. You cannot make chariots out of brass either very well. They won't hold together very well, won't take a beating like iron chariots will. But they are known for use of iron. And the iron gave them a lot of ability. So they were conquerors. Again, this was before it became unfashionable to conquer. They conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, but they also went through Egypt one day and went down to the African kingdom of I've forgotten the name, but they went, Axum. All right, they fought a war with Axum. They went down to the kingdom of Axum, which is today Ethiopia, and they won their war against the Ethiopian peoples in Axum. And to do that, they had to pass through both Israel and Egypt. Again, if you know your geography of the region, going from Assyria down to Axum. They've lasted for several generations. Now they had the habit, when they conquered a group of people, they would take up the upper classes, the more educated, the artisans, the craftsmen, the nobility, and they would transport these people to another location far away from home and tell them, okay, you can start life all over here. And the reason they would do that was they knew that if they got rid of the upper classes, the rest of the people who was left would not be able to organize into an army and form a rebellion. That somehow or other people only follow the more educated or the nobility. So they would deport the upper classes. That's basically what they did to Israel. They deported the upper part of Israelis and left the poorer ones of them behind. And the Israelis were moved to another territory. Now the Babylonians were to do the same thing. Deport the upper crust, leave the poor people behind, knowing the poor people would not be able to organize into rebellion. And generally poor people have had a problem with organizing. Now, they finally were defeated by a combined army of the Persians, Babylonians, and Egyptians got together, and they overmatched the Assyrians and defeated them. And the Assyrians largely disappeared from history. However, there are some 10 million people in the world today who claim descent from the Assyrians, 5 of them living in northern Iraq, the other 5 million scattered throughout the globe. And every once in a while they'll make news. Now, folks, there are persons who will say that ISIS is the revived Assyrian Empire. Yes?
You said the Persians, Babylonians, and who else?
And Egyptians. Persia, Babylon, and Egypt got together, and they whipped them. And Assyria was never able to rise again as a nation. So there are people like, there's several groups of people who are an ethnic group but don't have their own country. Among them the Lapps, living in Scandinavia, a land called Lapland, but Lapland is not a political country. The Armenians, well, today Armenia does have its own country, but until 1990 they didn't. And the Assyrians, they once had their own country, but today they don't. There are these ethnic groups that don't have their own country. Most notoriously, the American Indians hardly have their own country anymore. Now, again, you might think all this is ancient history, folks. You can take what I'm about to say whatever you want to. I mean, make whatever you want to. The Bible prophecy seems to indicate that Assyria is going to rise again and become very, very powerful, just like Babylon will. And again, some people who study the issue will tell you that they believe that the ISIS movement is the revival of the ancient Assyrian Empire. Be that what it may, you can take that what you want to. A lot of persons believe that the old gods that we've forgotten about, the gods Marduk, Enki, and Enlil, will eventually come back and be worshipped again. Again, you can take that for whatever you want to. Again, prophecy, some people would throw it aside, well, it means nothing, but it was prophesied that Israel would come back together again, and it did happen. So again, each of you to your own. I don't want to say anything more about that unless one of you want to say something more about it. Yes?
I think that's a little self-prophesizing. Like, it's the biggest group of people in America that is giving support to Israel is actually fundamental Christians. That they literally think the end times can happen in that area, Armageddon. And literally, I mean, there's people, mostly Christians, that are building Jewish settlements in Palestine to start conflict. Literally, like, that is their goal.
Israel realizes that the best friends they have in the world today are the evangelical Christians.
Yeah, because they literally.
And that's why, I mean, I went to Israel once. They are very, very friendly towards Christians who come in and visit their holy sites. I mean, again, they get a lot of money from tourists. Their number one industry is tourism. Again, it's because and again, a lot of persons believe that the end time events are going to happen right around Israel. And Babylon is going to play a big, big role, as is Assyria, as is Egypt. These nations that once went by the wayside. Now, folks, 70 years ago, if somebody would have, I mean, I could hardly have stood in front of a class and said, Babylon is going to become powerful again. Babylon, by the way, is modern day Iraq. Well, today it's beginning to happen. I mean, Iraq is in pieces right now and in turmoil, but if they get the right leader who can put them together, there's no telling what they could do. And ISIS has come from 3 years ago, come from the ashes. Like the story of the phoenix, the bird that was dead, burned up and rose from the ashes. Well, ISIS is like a phoenix rising from the ashes. Whether or not ISIS is Assyria or not, that is something the future will determine. All right, the next group I want to mention is Babylon. Babylon had been powerful back in the days of Hammurabi. Now again, folks, if you believe what I believe, that Babylon was once powerful in the days of Nimrod. Then it lost power for hundreds of years. Then Hammurabi basically started out really powerful. Then Hammurabi rose again, fell suddenly, and gradually over a long period of time finally rose again under Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar, I've already written that name up here. Babylon has gone up and down in its history. It has been destroyed completely more than once and rebuilt. However, the last time it was destroyed, it never was rebuilt until recently. Now, Saddam Hussein started to rebuild the city of Babylon, but Saddam Hussein found himself out of money and very busy fighting off the whole world who came against him, and he never was able to do much against us. I mean, about building the city of Babylon. But he tried. But anyway, the one person I want you to remember from Babylon is Nebuchadnezzar. He built up the Babylonian Empire, even though to the east he had an enemy. And, he made friends with the Persians. The Persians were more powerful than he was, so lucky for him, he married the daughter of the king of Persia and built a magnificent city in Babylon and enriched himself quite a bit. He was to govern for 43 years, and during that time he won just about all his wars. And the Babylonian Empire, true to form, only lasted about 17 years after he died. Again, folks, you have a case where the great man will build up a mighty empire, and in a short while after he's gone, the empire is destroyed. That is one reason why in our country we try to make sure that we're following not a person but the Constitution, we're following doctrine. And why they teach you in the Army, you're not following a man, you're following his office. But in those days, they followed the man who could lead them, and the result was when that man was gone, much too often, the whole place fell apart. What can I say? I mean, this story is typical over and over again. But he conquered Egypt. Nebuchadnezzar conquered Egypt, conquered the Phoenicians. This was some 300 years before Alexander. He conquered the Phoenicians, and he conquered Judah, the southern kingdom, and carried the top of the upper classes of Judean people captive to Babylon. Once Nebuchadnezzar was gone, Babylon was to last a short while, and then they would be conquered by the Persian Empire. All right, Persia. Persia was the last of the ancient great empires, and after Persia died, that part of the world was to die down in importance for a while, and Greece and Rome were to take over in importance. But anyway, the Persian Empire was almost as large as the United States. It stretched from India to Ethiopia, about 2,000 to 3,000 miles long. And it lasted about 200 years. And don't mean to make a comparison between the American experiment democracy has so far lasted a little bit more than 200 years. The only Persian king you won't remember is Cyrus. Cyrus the Great is remembered for his kindness and benevolence. He's the one who allowed the Jews to return back to their homeland. He actually, in the first year of his reign, one of the first things he did was allow all conquered peoples to return to their homeland. He reasoned that there'd be less likely to be rebellion. And true to form, the Jews never rebelled against Persia during the entire 200 years that Persia was in existence. The Persians and Jews were generally on friendly terms. Now, you wound up late in the history of this region, in the hegemony history, you had 4 kingdoms: Babylon, Persia, Lydia, and Egypt. It's almost like you then had a tournament. I mean, hey, 2 days ago we had 4 Major League Football teams still in contention to go to the Super Bowl. Today there were 2 left. So here's basically what happened. Lydia defeated Egypt, and Persia, wait a minute, back up a little bit. Lydia defeated Persia. I'll get it right. Persia defeated Lydia, and Babylon defeated Egypt. Now we have 2 left, Persia and Babylon, going at each other's head. Lydia was destroyed, and by the way, about the king of Lydia, he went to visit an oracle, which was becoming popular, the thing to do at the time, and the oracle told him, if you go to war against the Persian Empire, you will destroy a great empire. He went to war and his own empire was destroyed, his great empire. This was the way that the oracles treated the people who followed them. But anyway, leaving that.
It could be wrong either way.
What's that?
Could be wrong either way.
You couldn't be wrong either way, yes. If you go to war, you'll defeat a great empire, destroy his own empire, destroyed. Anyway, Persia and Babylon faced off, and Persia won. So Persia then conquered Babylon, and for 200 years Persia became the leading hegemony of that part of the world. Their first king, and perhaps the greatest, was Cyrus. He's known as Cyrus the Great. Now, I've mentioned there were three people in the ancient world who as babies were floated down a river. They were Sargon of Agag, Moses, and Cyrus. And in all three cases they were found while floating down a river, and they were brought up, and they all three became great leaders of the people. Cyrus, all right, the reason he was gotten rid of was the king of Persia, Cyrus's father-in-law, had no sons. And in those days he became what your father was. Well, the king of Persia had no sons, but he had a daughter. His daughter married a Persian man, which meant that Cyrus, who was born in that man, was a Persian. So then the king realized, hey, my grandson is a Persian, and I don't want the Persian to take over. He was himself a Mede. The Medes and Persians were buddies, but the Medes were the stronger. So he sent Cyrus down the river in a boat, where supposedly Cyrus would be devoured by the crocodile, whatever else might live in the river. Instead, some shepherds found him. He eventually realized that he was of royal descent, and Cyrus then was able to go back to his grandfather's palace. His grandfather was still alive, take over, and get the people to follow. But he was such a benevolent man that he did not kill his grandfather. He put his grandfather told his grandfather, you can work in the palace, do what you want to, own the palace freely. No, basically he was a secure man. He didn't have the insecurity like the Assyrians. I feel like I have to kill everybody inside, I have to mutilate and torture and maim to get my way. He believed that if you treated people kindly, they would respect you and they would follow you, and there would be fewer rebellions. So he treated his grandfather kindly, took over though, put his grandfather more or less on the shelf. And at that point it was called the Persian Empire instead of the Median Empire. Anyway, to make a long story short, the Persian Empire was destined to eventually be conquered by Alexander. The Persian Empire, they conquered Egypt, conquered Babylon, conquered what was left of the Assyrians, conquered Lydia. They had a lot of Turkey. They had a huge empire. To manage an empire, they set up post offices throughout the region, and the postal instructors were instructed, postal workers, have a saddled horse ready at all times, day or night. So when a postman came through, he would dismount the horse he had and turn it over to the post office and mount a fresh horse and go on. And every once in a while they'd change riders. The rider might ride for about 15 or 16 hours and he'd sleep, but they could get a message from one part of the empire to another in a week, similar to our Pony Express. It was very efficient, but the postal service said, have a person ready to ride at an instant's notice in case the other rider who comes through is too tired to go on, but always have a fresh horse saddled so that he can mount within a minute or two, mount a new horse, and in the meantime he'll rest the horse you've left behind. The horses are owned by the king, so it wasn't like anyone would lose a horse. And they would keep the mail moving from one part of the empire to another, and any letter you wrote would take less than a week to get from one end of the empire to the other. Now, one thing though that is unique about them, similar to the Jews, was their religion. Supposedly their religion was founded by a man named Zoroaster. Now I say supposedly, the last time I researched Zoroaster, there's some question as to whether he even existed. Of course, I mean, let's face it. The last time I looked up Abraham, somebody even questioned that he existed. I mean, and Moses, well, they questioned his existence also. So it shouldn't surprise anyone they questioned whether. But the fact is, I mean, then the next issue about Zoroaster is you cannot tell even within 400 years what time period. Did he live in 1000 BCE or did he live in 600 BCE? Again, we don't know. All right, but here's what Zoroaster taught. Zoroaster taught that the universe consisted of two opposing forces, basically good and evil, and for many generations, thousands of years, good would never quite triumph over evil, and every evil would never triumph because they were evenly balanced. But he believed eventually in the long run, good would triumph over evil. But that would be years down the road. But in the meantime, it was our duty, while we were on this earth, to take the side of the good and combat evil. Now, this may sound a whole lot like Christianity, and it may sound a whole lot like Judaism. There were some differences, though. And one of my big quarrels with Zoroaster, he believed that once you had chosen the side of evil, you could never, ever become good again. I can almost agree with it, because today it's known that if you fall into a bad habit, whether it be drugs or alcohol or tobacco, the chances of you fully recovering are about 1 in 20. Now, that's not to say you can't or won't, but these bad habits are extremely difficult to break. Zoroaster would tell you, oh, you can't break it, you're doomed, you're forever doomed, you're lost. I myself personally cannot, even though he was almost right. Very close to being right, perhaps. But he believed that once you'd fallen into a bad habit, you were doomed to that habit forever, and you were always on the side of evil. Now, another problem with Zoroaster was that religion was destined to fall first to Christianity. It could not stand up against the onslaught of Christianity when Christianity came in. Then came Islam. And when Islam came in, the Zoroastrians moved to a place in Western India, and their followers are still there. They live in communes, and they have accumulated a great amount of wealth. But so Zoroaster's followers are still around, but they are not in Persia anymore. Zoroaster, though, similar to what Moses had taught Israel, he taught morality, and this has led some people to wonder if Zoroaster did not come into contact with the Jews, and if he was not influenced by the Jews. After all, it's known the Jews were carried captive by Nebuchadnezzar into Persia. Some of them went to Persia. I mean, after all, Nebuchadnezzar married the daughter of the king of Persia. So that meant that some of the Jews that Nebuchadnezzar carried captive were scattered into Persia. And some of them might have influenced Zoroaster, because a lot of Zoroaster's teachings have a lot in common with Judaism and with Christianity that came later. Their chief god, oh yes. Now, this almost makes Zoroaster a monotheistic religion, because their god, Ahura Mazda, towered above all the others. However, unlike Judaism, they were allowed for others. There were other gods around. So Zoroaster was not as exclusively monotheistic as Judaism and Christianity and Islam became. But their chief god was Ahura Mazda, and he was their number one. And again, it was our duty to fight the side of good. So Persian boys were taught to use the lance and speak the truth. Use the lance and speak the truth. They were taught to be warriors, soldiers. Unfortunately, though, for the Persians, they were destined to be defeated by Alexander the Great. And I had a Persian boy in my class. Today called Iranian. He said that Darius III, who opposed Alexander, was the second greatest military commander of all time, and he may have been. The problem was he had to fight the greatest, Alexander. But if he'd fought anybody else, he could have won. As it was, Persia fell to Cyrus. Persia fell to Alexander. Persia fell to Alexander. Then eventually the Persian Empire rose up again, became very powerful, and fought hundreds of years of wars with the Roman Empire, which weakened it. Then came Islam, and Islam overcame him. That's the subject of chapter 7. All right. With this, we finished chapter 1. So I will spend the next 20 or so minutes reviewing. You're welcome. One thing I don't know if I mentioned, the way we modern people keep time. At one time, it was BC and AD. B meant before Christ. AD stood for Latin words Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord. So it had to do with Christ. But today we want to be inclusive and include everybody. So we have changed the BC to CE, which means before the Common Era, and CE, which means the Common Era. Now again, the dating that was established during the Middle Ages simply was so entrenched we can't get rid of it. So, but it's just simply give the same dating a different name. I mean, George Washington was born February 22nd, 1732. I mean, that hasn't changed. But what has changed, we now say he was born in 1732 CE instead of 1732 AD. That's a big difference. And again, when we say that Rome fell in 476, it's no longer 476 AD, it's 476 CE. I won't emphasize dates a whole lot, but you need to know this because you'll see it when you read ancient history. They now refer to before the Common Era or the Common Era. All right. Okay, now, by way of review, starting at the beginning. Who were the Sumerians?
Was it,
First,
They were the first known civilization. Lived in the southern part of Mesopotamia, near where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers joined together before they emptied the Persian Gulf.
First people that start farming.
What's that?
One of the first people to start farming.
Yeah, they believed to have invented a whole lot of things, including farming. They learned how to farm with both plants and animals. They were grain growers, wheat growers. They did not have potato. They did not have what we call corn. So they had oats, barley. They had sheep, cows, pigs. They had horses.
you said they were the inventors of the wheel.
Yeah, they were the inventors of the wheel, as far as we can tell. I mean, if you dig, all right, that's archaeology. Yeah, I've got that. So much of what we know about ancient history comes from archaeology. And when we dig into Sumeria, we reach a certain level and we find wheels. When we go down below that level, we don't find wheels, indicating that wheels might not have existed early on in our history. So, personally, I doubt that. But the absence of evidence does not mean the evidence of absence, folks. But we don't find wheels way down deep in some of their cities. And when I say dig, all right, keep in mind the way these people live, they threw all their garbage out in the streets. And also all their animal waste were thrown out in the streets, which meant the streets kept rising higher and higher with each generation. And after a while, the street level would rise higher than their house. So what would you do? The sons and daughters would build another layer of houses on top of the old house. And then garbage would continue to pile up. And after a while, we have the Arabs call them tells. We have great mounds where a city used to be. And archaeologists will go in and they'll dig, well, here's this layer. Then they'll dig a little bit deeper. Now here's the previous layer and dig deeper. The farther down you dig, the older they get. But they built their cities in such a way they had to build on top of the old. Now today, of course, we take our garbage to a special dump and dump it in a dump. And as for our buildings, when they become old, we simply tear them down. And I was explaining to my wife, in the modern world, it's sometimes a whole lot easier to build a new building just by tearing the old one away and putting a new one up. I mean, my wife was surprised to see a Chick-fil-A store level to the ground, and she got to inquiring on what's happening. Oh, they're just putting a new one in its place. Well, what was wrong with the old one? It was a little bit old, and the wiring, after a while, see, the wiring had become a little bit frayed, and the plumbing had become a little bit corroded, and the ducting had become a little bit moldy. So, hey, the best fix, tear the whole thing down and start to do it from scratch. And if any of you ever tried to wire an old building, maybe if you know what I mean, it's very, very difficult. Very. You have to knock out part of the walls and put the wall back in place. A lot of time. Now, of course, what they do here, they put drops here. This ceiling is very easy to remove and then put back in place. That helps. But I spent some time at Lockheed rewiring old airplanes. That was no fun. It's sometimes just, hey, scrap the whole thing out and start to do it from scratch and wire it as you build it. But again, they had their own way of doing things. All right, archaeology, practice of digging down to discover how the old people lived way back. Now, who was Hatshepsut? Now, if you were to see Hatshepsut on the test, what would you? I'm not going to guarantee you will or won't. She was a lady, became queen of Egypt, took the title of Pharaoh. Her son tried to erase her memory. Yes, yeah, Hatshepsut. She's remembered. One of the few pharaohs that we remember and even use her name in elementary school. We used to, put it that way. Another one of the more famous pharaohs is King Tut, because his tomb was found containing most of the gold that he was buried with. Yes? Hatshepsut, H-A-T, Hat, S-H-E-P, S-U-T, Hatshepsut. Yeah, and of course there were pharaohs named Ramses and Akhenaton and Amenhotep. Don't worry about those so much. Now, oh yes, yes.
Well, it says in the book, you said the other day, or when you were taking notes, that her son tried to like
Right.
memory, but it says that her nephew succeeded her. Is there gonna be like discrepancy
Oh
on the
man,
test?
you're probably right. The next pharaoh, okay, okay. What I think probably happened was she had no children. That's probably, I mean, okay, then you're probably right. I'll stand corrected. Her nephew, the person who succeeded her, though, at least what I was taught, tried to obliterate her memory and threw her statues in the trash. Nephew. Again, if a queen had no son, then the throne would go to the nearest of kin. Now, the biggest pyramid in Egypt was built by Sapoga, which pharaoh? The Great Pyramid of who? Khufu. Yeah, but sometimes Herodotus called him Cheops, but the Great Pyramid of Khufu. And he had a son named Khephren who built the second Great Pyramid in that region. Khufu is credited with having built the Great Pyramid. Now, what Sumerian city was said to have been destroyed in a bright flash of fire so big that it melted the bodies of the persons who were in it? What city am I talking about? And keep in mind, these Sumerian cities were made out of clay and they had nothing in them to burn. Uruk? No, what's that? Uruk? You're close. Ur. Yeah, Ur and Uruk were separate cities. And again, Ur is destroyed. Bitter is its lament. And you have to ask yourself just what was there in that city that burned? You are. Yeah. The father of the Jewish people, Abraham, was from Ur, originally from Ur. All right. What do I mean by Paleolithic? Paleolithic. Old stone. Old stone. Very old stones. So then again, this is going back to the modern days, man's way of thinking of these people. The farther back in time you go, the more primitive they are. And they were old Stone Age. And then the more advanced became new stone, they could make better stone tools, and they found better stones to work with. And they discovered how good flint was. Flint is, oh yeah, speaking of making flint arrows, at one time we thought that Indian arrow, that took an Indian hours to make an arrowhead, but some man demonstrated using another piece of flint that it could be made, he could make one in a minute and a half. Just take an ordinary flint rock and using another chip of flint, chip out an arrowhead in about a minute and a half, and a high quality arrowhead. And he believed that the Indians in America learned how to do that. And we found millions of Indian arrowheads on creek beds or various places. Now, oh yeah, what's the name of the Egyptian river? The Nile. A waterfall where the river in Africa, particularly in Africa, flow along a while and then drop off. This waterfall is called a cataract. Cataract. If Egypt, you divide Egyptian history into Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom, the pyramids were built during which kingdom? The Old Kingdom. And a canal that joined the Red Sea to the Nile River was also built in the Old Kingdom. The modern term for human beings, scientific term, is Homo sapien. Hopefully you knew that. Let's see. The type of writing, the Egyptian writing is known as what? Cuneiform, wrong. Egyptian writing is hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics. Babylonian writing is cuneiform. Then came along a new group of people who learned how to write a different way. People I'm thinking about are the Phoenicians, and they gave us phonics. The Phoenicians. And I've already mentioned how that Nebuchadnezzar conquered the Phoenicians. Alexander later Alexander the Great also conquered the Phoenicians. What Babylonian ruler do you remember for his law code? Hammurabi. His law code revolved around an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Had a lot in common with the Mosaic law code, and also his law code favored the upper classes against the lower ones, which is something that we in the modern world frown on. Oh yeah, the word that I don't know if I've mentioned much, but I'll mention it now. They rule by a family, whether the rule goes from father to son and grandson, or if there's no son and nephew. This is called a, that's patriarchy. Well, I mean, okay, but the word I'm thinking about, patriarch is father to son, that's true, but what, a woman might even be involved sometimes. Let's say dynasty. Dynasty. Yeah, the word name is, now, typically, folks, the average dynasty has only lasted about 3 generations. Dynasties would come in and take over. The powerful ruler would start them off. The son will sometimes become very powerful. Then come the 3rd generation, you have a young kid who was spoiled rotten and incapable of actually reading, and the people would not follow him. Dynasty, ruled by a family, and dynasties over time have a tendency to die out. Usually, like I say, average dynasty will last about 3 generations. Egypt dated, they construct their history around a dynasty. There was a 1st dynasty, 2nd dynasty, 3rd dynasty, 4th dynasty, then the Old Kingdom came to an end. Then came the 1st intermediate period, the 5th and 6th dynasties. Then came the Middle Kingdom, and it consists of several dynasties, followed by the 2nd intermediate period. Who was the chief Egyptian goddess? Isis. And she had a son named Osiris. Osiris. All right. Something else, folks, I must mention about these people. I've been meaning to forgot about you now. They depicted oftentimes their gods as having human bodies but with falcon heads. And they also depicted their gods as having human bodies but with cat heads. The Egyptians had a love for the domestic cat, what we might today call a house cat. We don't know for sure how the Sumerians are credited with having the first cats. Apparently cats found their way into Egypt somehow. Folk, I'm not going to apologize for being far-fetched. There are persons who believe that the ancients mastered the secret of interbreeding between species to where their falcon-headed creatures were actually real entities, real creatures that actually had a human body and a falcon head. And the Greeks had the centaur, the horse's body, but a human from the torso up. Again, have any of you ever read about or heard about these creatures? They're considered mythological today. The winged horse, the Pegasus, yeah, the winged horse. Now, whether or not these people, now I'll tell you, now as far-fetched as it may seem at first, crossbreeding between species has been going on in modern laboratories for more than 50 years. And if you don't believe it, you can look it up. I just looked it up recently. We have read creatures that are part of human. The governments of the world have outlawed the practice and said that these creatures must be killed right away. But human DNA has been mixed with the DNA of various other animals. Have any of you heard about this?
It's called X-Men.
What's that?
It's called X-Men.
It's been going on for some 50. I first heard about it when I was younger than any of you are now. It's been going on for at least 50 years. And if you, again, you can believe what you want to, but if the ancients, I mean, again, their gods had a tendency to have cat heads, falcon heads, and of course the Babylonians had this lion body with a human head, and the lion body had wings. Again, that's very famous for being a symbol of Babylon, the winged lion with a human head. These symbols are used in the Old Testament. Daniel uses them, and some of the other prophets use these as symbols. And even the last book of the Bible, Book of Revelation, talks about the animals that are part human and part animal. Again, folk, I need to point out to you, it's there. You can do with it what you want to, but it is, in fact, in the records. The pictures of them are there. Again, the falcon-headed men, the cat-headed men, they are there. All right. Who was the Israeli ruler who built the first temple? Very wealthy. Solomon. Solomon built the temple. The temple was to last 300 years before it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. The Persian kings allowed it to be rebuilt. Then Herod built a really, really magnificent temple, and then the Romans destroyed that one. The ruins of the third temple, the Herod's temple, are still there, part of them. I was there one time. A few stones are still standing. All right. Who was the Jewish man who is said to have killed the giant Goliath? David. All right. What nation is credited with being the first to use iron? What people? The who? Assyrians. The Assyrians are credited with being the first to use iron. Oh yes. Something else I hope I have mentioned, maybe I haven't. Anthropology. Now, anthropology is taught right here in this campus. Who knows what anthropology is?
Like the
Study of.
like bones and the earth.
It's a study of bone. Mostly it's a study of how humanity has spread himself over the globe. Mostly a study of humanity, and where he came from, where he started from, and where he spread, the trails he took, the routes he took, the civilizations he built.
So it's like the study of the earth and the history of people.
The earth, but it doesn't just rely on written records. They join written records with DNA, archaeology, structure, study of skeletal structure, the whole bit, folks. Anthropology. Very important. All right, one other. Who was Gilgamesh? Gilgamesh. He was the king of Uruk, who is said to be 2/3 God and 1/3 mortal, but he was upset because being mortal he had to die. And he tried to find eternal life, but he didn't. Now, I told you to look at that, something that's online about Inanna, Enmerkar, and Errata. Know those names. Inanna is said by some to have been the founder of all the world's religions. A great. Oh yeah, another. I don't think I mentioned this. She's also known as the Queen of Heaven. Inanna. Now she is associated with Venus, which some people believe that she's therefore is the same as the Roman goddess Venus, the Greek goddess Aphrodite. The Greeks and Romans worship the same god with names. And the Norse god Frigga, from which the word Friday comes from. The Norse have a goddess named Frigga. These goddesses were goddesses of love and fertility. Supposedly they could help your crops grow. And supposedly they make your cattle more fertile, more potent, and increase your cattle, your crops, your horses, if you honor these people.
So Inanna, Enmerkar, and
Enmerkar was the Inanna's son, and the next son after, the next king after Enmerkar was Lugobanda, who was given the gift of super speed by an Anzu bird, whose Anzu bird, he had helped his Anzu bird's son, offspring. And then Lugobanda said that he could just sense the evil in the gods when the gods came to him. He prayed to the gods, and the gods came and cured him of his illness. But he just somehow he could sense the evil. That's in the, if you read the story, that's in the story. And again, even they seem to think that these gods were very, very evil. And of course, something else about these gods, when the going got tough, these gods took off and flew off and got going. That's what it says in that book about Ur is destroyed. Our gods have abandoned us like migrating birds. They have flown away. But if the going gets tough, the tough get out of here. No, the untough get out of here. Put it that way. Anyway, all right, folk. Let's see.